I want to hear from the expert based on some data. How do people feel about health insurance companies overall?
There's a couple of ways to look at this. Right? One is...
Today's guest is Anoop Bhogal, Senior Manager, Song Health and Public Service at Accenture. He's also Digital Health and Change Enablement Manager at Accenture. He shares how data, AI, and customer experience strategies can transform health insurance by making it more personalized and truly member-focused.
If I asked you to name the top 10 companies that you thought were innovative and interesting and really kind of get your attention, those companies are successful not only because they have a good product or a good service, but because they have put the consumer right at the middle. People move from one service to the next, from one product to the next. That happens much more dynamically, and health insurance as an industry has taken way longer to adapt that mindset than other industries.
You know that your customer is supposed to be your entire focus. Why are health plans completely missing the point of this whole thing?
Well, there's lots of history there. So
Welcome to our podcast, When Health Freezes Over. I'm super excited to introduce everyone to my very dear friend, Anoop Bhogal, who has over 20 years of experience in, organizational psychology, frankly, and membership experience. You're part of the Song customer growth strategy practice at Accenture. Please introduce yourself to our, audience.
Hi, everybody. Anoop Bhogal. As Omar said, I'm part of Accenture, our customer growth strategy group within Song, which is our kind of creative agency and kind of design group. Our practice is specifically kind of focused on health, and I do a lot of work in the marketing, customer experience, and design space. So, most of my time is spent doing marketing, digital strategy, designing customer experiences for clients, helping clients think more about the experience that the average consumers get from their healthcare and from their health insurance, and making that experience, better, helping them understand that the way consumers think about health isn't necessarily the way that we in the health insurance industry think about health. Right. And so reframing it a little bit and designing experiences that consumers find valuable.
And so, I go back to when I met you first. This has got to be, obviously, it was pre-COVID, 18, I think 18.
Somewhere. Yeah.
Somewhere there, right?
Yeah.
And I think now you had been engaged by, and this is a very large insurer, national insurer, $25 billion top line.
Right.
You engaged to do what? If you could think that far back.
Boy, that was a while back.
Yeah. Because I recall a lot of the C-suite was in those meetings, and you were trying to, I think the goal when you and I met was you were trying to get the employees to understand what our role was and what our team needed, how you need to engage the teams. It wasn't so much on membership experience, it felt like it was more like employee experience at the time.
It was, and I think there was a financial component to that one too.
Course.
I think they were looking to figure out how to spend how to use their internal budget to get internal members a little more engaged in the process. But we were also looking at how communications in that particular organization, it was pretty federated. And so it was hard to get a consistent message about what was working and what wasn't. And so I think that was part of the kind of set of kind of recommendations that we had put together around that.
So that brings us to our very first question, which has been a burning question for many of us. I think for everybody who's going to be watching this podcast and in general, how do people feel about health insurance companies overall? I know the answer, but I'm sure everybody knows the answer, but I want to hear from the expert because we're trying to do this based on some data. We're not trying to just shoot from the hip here, even though we all know what the feeling is. But what does the data suggest? How do people feel about health plans overall?
So there's a couple of ways to look at this, right? One is through the lens of the insurance industry. They all measure customer experience, usually using NPS as their
Net Promoter Scores.
Net Promoter Score as their primary measure of what they call experience. NPS has been around for years and years and years. I think my feeling is NPS is not really a true measure of experience. It might be a point in time gauge of how a consumer feels about an organization, but it's not really a true representation of their sentiments.
It's not a
right?
longitudinal representation.
NPS
Yeah.
asks,
It's a
would you
discrete data.
recommend us
Right.
to your friends and
Right,
family?
right, right.
Which,
It's a discrete data point. It's not a longitudinal sort of
right,
feeling about
right.
how you feel about this plan over the last 5 years.
Exactly right. So there's NPS and some related metrics around that most insurers use to measure experience, and that's how they kind of promote themselves to say, hey, we've got an NPS score of X, and that's good, and that's okay. But the other lens is then when you look at it compared to other industries, and we conduct research around that too. So we understand where health insurance fits in the spectrum of industries that all consumers are exposed to, right? And the fact of the matter is, health and health insurance is low on the list.
From what I understand, it's the lowest on the list. Or is it
It's down there.
down
It's
there?
pretty down. Yeah, it's pretty low.
Is it above cable companies or is it below cable
It's
companies?
right there, I think,
Okay,
around
cable company.
cable companies. And anyone who's had a poor experience with their cable company
Yeah.
knows what
Those
that
who-
feels like.
right.
Health insurance, it's down there. We look to industries like retail and banking and other service industries, travel, etc., as kind of where the bar is really being set as far as experience. And if you look at companies, if I asked you to name the top 10 companies that you thought were innovative and interesting and really kind of get your attention, I think most of us would list the same 7 out of those 10. We'd list probably the same companies. Those companies are successful because not only because they have a good product or a good service, but because they have put the consumer right at the middle. And they've taken the time to understand, how does the consumer perceive us, and what experience and service are we delivering that helps that consumer make the most of what we're offering and kind of fold it into their lives.
So, I mean, everybody knows that, right? I mean, it's 2026. You know that your customer, the guy or the woman who's paying the bills, is supposed to be your entire focus, right? Why are health plans completely missing the point of this whole thing? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, there's lots of history there, right? So you go back to the 80s and 90s, maybe in the early 2000s. It was a different time. Health insurance, the industry was, kind of pretty happy because everybody was paying into that, and that was just where the bar was set. Experience hadn't prevailed yet as a real indication of how people feel, right? It hadn't really come to the forefront. And also the younger generations, right, your millennials and your Gen Zs and so on, were coming into that age, the age of of smartphones and other kind of digital technologies and capabilities. That has changed the paradigm completely. Decisions are made by those generations much more quickly compared to my generation and older, right? We tend to stick with a particular service because it's okay.
Right. It's predictable too.
It's predictable. It's somewhat reliable. Younger people, their decisions are made much more quickly. And so people move from one service to the next, from one product to the next. That happens much more dynamically. And health insurance as an industry, has taken way longer to adapt or get their heads around that mindset than other industries, right? Other industries have adapted very quickly because they, particularly areas like retail, travel, and so on, it's direct to consumer that you have to adapt or you're out of business. Health insurance has taken a much longer time to kind of reach that conclusion. So to answer the question, they're starting to make that evolution, right? To understand what experience really means, to figure out how to deliver that experience, not just in service as a channel, but digital, right? All the different digital channels through your mobile app and your phone and through the web and so on, right? And through their member portals. They're starting to figure that out. But it's a tricky process.
So, having said that, you've got a ton of experience on all this. Why don't you sort of give us an example of what an illustrative member goes through during the course of a year, and what communication do they generally get from a health plan? That sort of illustrates the chasm between what's happening in a person's life and what the health insurance. And I'll share you my own experience with you as well. But I want to give you a shot because you are trying to steer the ship, and it's slow moving. And so help me understand. Give an illustrative example of what you think happens in a person's life, you know, during the course of a year. It could be multiple lives, but anyway, during the course of a year, and then what sort of communication do they generally get? Because that would be an example of why people are just like, "What is wrong with this plan?" They don't even know who I am, and I've been with this plan for maybe 1 year or 2 years.
Okay. So usually the start of the year, actually the better place to start is towards the end of the year, because that's open enrollment for most commercial consumers, right? If you're on the affordable, if you're on the ACA, or if you have your insurance through your employer group, open enrollment is in that, October, November period. So you renew or you sign up for a health plan, and then you start to get communications about, here are your new benefits, which might come electronically or it might come on paper, depending on what you signed up for.
Right.
But it's lots of
Yeah.
jargon.
Yeah.
Most people don't understand the jargon.
Yeah.
And then comes like, here's your onboarding information at the start of the year, make the most of your benefits, sign up, join our member portal, sign up, right? Go to this place to sign up. All things that consumers are being asked to do to sign up and take advantage of things, right? So during that time, consumers are being asked to do stuff that is not part of like what they might do in their everyday lives, right?
Yeah.
The way I look at it is, most consumers are busy. They have lives. They've got, they're raising kids. They're, doing things for the kids' schools, or they've got work to do. They've got meals to plan, vacations to think about, shopping to do, all things that we do as people. Most of those things are way more interesting than, signing or registering for your insurance portal, right? So it's not seen as something exciting and interesting. Part of that might be because the information that consumers get isn't telling them, here's the exciting, interesting, value-add stuff that's relevant to you, Omar, versus things that are relevant to Anoop, right? So it's standard information that
Yeah.
gets sent pretty much
And at the
to
same
everybody.
time, you got members who are, going through personal issues,
Sure.
marriages, babies born, divorces, deaths, diseases, depending on where the age bracket is, actually across the age brackets. But what do you get from the health plan? While all this is going on in a member's life, you get some, hey, why don't you join this fat loss group? Like, really? I mean, why don't you like, so, I will practice, you and I practice karate, right? On a regular basis. Pretty heavy cardio. I play some squash, whatever. And I get letters all the time. Here's what you can do for fat loss. And I'm like, really? I mean, what more can I do for fat loss? It's like, do you have any clue?
Right.
Because they don't.
Right. So what you're driving at is this notion of personalization,
Right.
right? And that's, again, something that most of our clients are very aware of, and they are making efforts to bridge the gap, but it's still a gap, right? That comes, the way to enable that is the use of the right technology, so you can actually pull in data to a place where you can then understand, like, who's already signed up for a wellness program, who's already who's already joined a gym, right? Who's already in a particular care program, who's on prescription meds, right? If we know that information, which they all do, then you can start to target members with more personalized, relevant messaging, right? So if they know that, you're doing karate or you're in a gym, then they don't need to send you the wellness program necessarily, or maybe they they target a particular element of a wellness program that complements what you're already doing, rather than it coming across as a little bit blind as to not recognizing what you're already, you know, doing to stay healthy. So the technology, there's an investment in the technology, which again, a lot of health plans are either have it or are on their way to doing that. And then there's time needed to then, you know, study the data, leverage new technologies like AI, which are making this much simpler than it was even like 3 years ago, 2 years ago. It's much simpler now to do very quick analytics across your data, identify your high risk segments, or the people you want to target to join particular programs, the people you want to target to avoid going to the emergency room when they could be going to an urgent care or to their primary care doctor, so that they're not spending, you know, unnecessary money themselves as consumers, et cetera, right? So there are ways to target people that save them money. There are ways to target people that drive interest in programs, but there's time needed, a little bit of time needed to do that segmentation and then devise your strategy to go, you know, target those individuals.
So let me ask you this question, Oop. I mean, you've talked about the data is available, AIs want to make it easier, yet we still see payers struggling with doing this. They know what to do. They know that the answer to membership retention and less churn and more predictability in the mix of members for next year would be doing all these things. So what do plans do? When do they engage you? And how committed have you seen plans to actually going through and following through on these and trying to fundamentally address the issue of membership retention or membership experience?
Yeah, it's a complex question to answer, and when they call us depends on where they are. Each individual plan is in a different place as it relates to figuring out their retention strategy. So sometimes they're calling us in the early part of the year because the sales cycle begins in the summer, really, right, for the following year. So they might be looking at their retention, what happened in the last enrollment cycle. Spring is spent, figuring out like what happened here, how do we lose, people, or where do we gain people, etc. Then they might call us to say like, now we need a plan to figure out how to drive up retention, or how, if our retention's good, we need a plan to figure out our growth, our growth strategy. So, they could call us in that window, and then we'll bring people in to, look at the data, work with the client, figure out what their actual strategy is, because the data will tell you something, and we certainly have industry and cross-industry, data and analytics that will inform that even further to help clients make good decisions. But ultimately, clients are like every business, they're figuring out, how do we grow our business? How do we stay profitable, right? And what does it take to do that? Often there's a lot of internal cost within payers. So there's a balance to be struck between a path to growth, which requires funding, a path to reducing administrative cost, which requires funding, and a path to reducing medical expense, which requires funding. There's rarely adequate funding for all three at the same time. So choices have to be made. And this is where we run into the tricky area, in particularly as it relates to marketing and experience. Because when it comes to making those choices, marketing and experience don't usually rise to the top of that list. And that's just a reality of where we are.
Right.
Because, maybe because of, like I said, going back to the 80s and the 90s and so on, marketing and communications was more of a cost center. I don't think that's the reality of things now. I think marketing and experience should be seen as value drivers. They can generate growth. They can absolutely have direct line to retention. If you're sending the right information to the right people at the right time, that creates a sense of, they know me, I feel good about what they're sending, I'm going to stay. There's no reason that I would move, because why would I want to take the time and the hassle of switching health insurers? There's a lot of administration that goes with that as a consumer. If I'm getting what I need, if I feel like they see me, if they're sending me information that's relevant, particularly if I'm dealing with some sort of condition that requires care and I'm getting my meds and so on and so on, it's easier to stay. But if one poor experience, most people are jumping somewhere else, like going back to those younger generations, right? And it takes a dozen good experiences to make up for one poor one. So this goes back to those choices. And so, like any business, payers have to make choices about where are they putting their money, where are they placing their bets in any given year. But I think there is a message to be heard around the value of marketing, communications, and experience as being direct contributors and drivers of value and growth, which is different than how it used to be.
So, I mean, in your experience, which ones, I mean, without naming plans, of course, what are the plans that are actually successful at this? What are they doing? I mean, do you have a comparison outside of that industry, to some other industry, that what is that doing, and that what the health industry can actually learn from that?
Yeah.
Why don't you share that?
The plans that are, I think, finding some success, it's usually when marketing is aligned and collaborating with like the IT group, for example. Because I mentioned there has to be investment, usually investments in technology. IT tends to get more funding than marketing. So if, this kind of smart marketing players are aligning themselves with their, the CMO and the CIO or the CTO, they're aligning themselves. If they have a CXO, they're pulling the CXO in as well, right? And to say the investment in a suite of technologies that will allow us to get more data into a place where we can do targeted communications. So a customer data repository, right, or a CDP, investment in a CDP, which is linked to whatever marketing execution, outbound kind of communication tools you have, which is linked to service, because it's one thing to send communications out, but your service group that's taking phone calls every day, they need to know what was sent to Omar, what was sent to Anoop, what was sent to these people and those people. Because if that person calls in and says, hey, I got an email that talked about an offer on, joining this wellness program, and the service rep doesn't know what that email is, poor experience, right? You need consistency across the channels, which means the technologies have to be linked. So those, the ones that are starting to see success, they're investing in that kind of connected set of technologies that allow them to do not only communications across channels outbound, but they're also listening to what comes in, right? And the service reps, the agents, are armed with that information. AI, I mentioned AI. AI is layered into that in many different ways. So you can now we're starting to see AI as, and part of what actually we're bringing to clients is the ability to inject AI agents into the marketing process so that you have far quicker throughput. You can spin up more campaigns targeted to smaller groups of people and get them out the door all the time, consistently. It used to take weeks, months actually, just to get one set of campaigns, a journey stood up and out. Now you can do it in minutes, right? So AI is playing a role there. AI is playing a role in the service side, because they have agents that are analyzing this data and popping into the rep's ear or on their screen. These are the talking points that you want to bring up with this individual, because I've looked at that data and this is what's relevant to them, right? Just making that experience better because the AI is helping them do that, right? So the investment in the technology is a big piece of it, but it's equally important that they're investing in their people, right? So the marketers and the people that do a lot of that work today, they have to get smart in using those AI tools, because it's not replacing the people. The people are still necessary to monitor what the AI capabilities are producing and doing a check before anything goes out, right? And it's giving them more space for the creative, right? Now AI can help with that too, but right now it's a really good place for marketers to think about how do we develop our creative strategy that's far more compelling and variations of it that cater to different audiences. It doesn't have to be one set of, content that goes to everybody.
Right.
You can have lots more variation on it now. And a lot of the nuts and bolts of execution, you can automate almost all of that now.
And so, being an actuary, I'm just kind of curious, what sort of data would an insurance company collect to start to sort of put this all together in terms of trying to understand the entire complexity of who I am? You know, so they have claims data on me,
Sure.
but that's really I mean, let's say as an example, I had an appendectomy, I had my appendix removed. That's no indication of anything. That just means I had an appendix removed. But I may be developing symptoms. I may have other lifestyle decisions that I make or do or whatever follow. Obviously, I have kids, I'm married, et cetera, et cetera. I'm at a certain age bracket. So, what data? So, as an actuary, I've been just dealing with medical and pharmacy claims data. I've also been dealing with SDOH data, to some degree. Even though it's 2026, the health insurance companies aren't really dealing with SDOH to the degree that they can. I mean, it is being collected, but it's not being really impacted or used as diligently as medical and pharmacy claims. So, what data sets, what sources of information do health plans have or can get access to start to sort of put a picture together of an individual?
It's all out there already, right? There's there's a whole ton of internal data that payers already collect. Claims, obviously, there's a lot of clinical data. There's interaction data, right? How are they interacting with us through communications, through calls into the service desk? There's a ton of data there that helps paint a picture. But to your point, oh, it's largely clinical, right? Now, all those payers also have third-party vendors that administer wellness programs and care programs and gym memberships and all that stuff. Those vendors share, I think, pretty much share that data with those payers, right? Because it's part of their contractual relationship. So they have that too. There is external data on retail habits, buying, where people are purchasing. There's data on what information you Google. There's information about that. What people are Googling information about, knee replacement surgery. You can go buy that data and find that data. It's all there. The challenge is not the data. The challenge is aggregating the
Right.
data in a data lake and then making sense of it, right? Collecting it in a place where you can then see the bigger picture, the 80% of Omar that's not clinical
Right.
versus the 20% that is,
Correct.
to paint that picture of like what else is going on that helps us understand what Omar needs or what any individual needs, so we can give them the necessary information about their benefits that help them achieve their goals as a human being, not just as a member of us, the health insurer, right? That's the challenge, which again, analytics and AI can help with that, but requires a bit of investment to make it happen. But the data's out there. There's no shortage of data, right? The really tricky part is pulling it together and then connecting it in a way that they can then make decisions, pulling the necessary components of that data into their CEP to be able to do more targeted messaging.
So, if you were talking to C-suite, what would you recommend in terms of what they should be doing differently than what they are doing right now, especially in today's day and age where, you've got runaway trends on medical and pharmacy, especially pharmacy. So the C-suite is really thinking about how do I cut costs? You know, how do I retain my job? Is what the C-suite is thinking because they've got, an existential issue. So maybe today is not the time, but I think that, they should be sort of looking under every rock to figure out how to maintain membership because it is becoming a membership issue. Because if you don't do it, somebody else will. And so, what should C-suite be doing differently, and what could they be learning from other industries to do better?
We have a thing that comes out every year called Life Trends. And so this is not to do with health. This is just to do with what are consumers in the country, or, even more broadly than that, what do consumers care about, right? Where are they Where are they worried or anxious? Where do they feel that there's, something useful for them? Like, what are they prioritizing in life? Because it shifts all the time, right? We change our minds about what we care about, what's important. That's an example of information that I think, CEOs and C-suite members could be looking at to help them get a broader sense of like what's important to consumers, because healthcare is inevitably part of that, right? Particularly in this country, we're making decisions about, in health, we're making decisions about what can I afford to do in terms of managing my health or taking care of a particular issue, an injury or a condition, right? There are financial implications to making those choices, right? Um, Depending on what your benefit plan covers or doesn't cover. Life Trends plays into that. Other industries, they also do a lot of research, right? So they're always, conducting surveys. We do it ourselves at Accenture, specifically for health insurance on the payer side, and we do it on the provider side too. So we're always gathering data that tells us more about what do consumers care about, where is the trust, how do they feel about their digital engagement, with their health plan, what would help them stay with their health plan, what factors go into making them stay versus leave. Like, all of that information is stuff we gather directly from consumers that I think can greatly help executives understand the bigger picture in health and outside of health that is informing how consumers make decisions, right? So, example I'll give is in health, we think within the industry, there are kind of specific stages of the health kind of life cycle, right? So, you know, from onboarding at the beginning to like getting enrolled in a plan and sending the right information out, and allergy season in the spring and the summer, and then into fall and starting to think about renewals. And there's a particular set of stages that we think about. It's very in the bubble, right? Most people in the world don't think about their healthcare that way.
Right.
Healthcare is one of those industries or one of those things in your average life where I don't think about it unless I have to. When something goes sideways, I need to take care of it. I get injured or whatever happens, right? And then I have to engage with my health insurance company to see that it's covered. But the goal, if you think about it as like this is baseline, when something goes sideways, my goal is to get back to baseline.
Right.
Right?
Correct.
Help me get past this problem or manage this condition or get through this injury so I can get back to baseline and get on with my life. That's what most of us want to be able to do.
Yeah.
We've got other priorities, kids, and other things to worry about. So get me back to baseline. If the health insurance company knows that something happened and can reach out and say, here's how your benefits are going to work for you quickly and efficiently and simply, and get you back to baseline, and then just step aside, you're good. Most consumers, I think, would say, okay, you helped me. I'm back to baseline. I don't need to worry. I don't need to think about you again, right? But when I need you,
You're there.
I need to know you're there. And I think that's the difference maker.
And that you're there keeping me specifically in mind, not just generically there.
Exactly right. Yes.
Having a specific sort of a bespoke, customized message, customized needs for my needs specifically.
Exactly. Yep. You got to know it.
Yeah. And so, what do you think are the broader sort of issues that are, I guess it's we've talked about it, but the financial ramifications of health plans right now, I'm assuming that's probably one of the major reasons why they seem to be stymied. Meaning, I'm always baffled. We all know the answers. We all know the data is there. We all know what to do about it. And like you also said, that there are financial decisions that have to be made, choices that have to be made. When do you think this decision is going to be actually made to put consumers first at the center of their business? When do you think that's going to happen? Like, do you think that we're just going to sort of muddle along and at some point get through this trough and get to the peak and everyone's like, "Oh, okay, now we got extra cash, so maybe we'll start to focus on members," or is it just going to be just trudging along and hoping something happens? Because I'm not, we've been doing this. I mean, I've been doing this 30 years. I don't recall a time when, now, of course, I'm an actuary, so I'm rarely pulled in for those kinds of analytics, even though I think that there's a lot of overlay between, how actuaries and folks like you can work together, because it's all data analytics. It's all insights. It's not necessarily medical and pharmacy claims, but it is analyzing data and understanding the underlying risk of your membership base, different types of risk outside of medical and pharmacy claims. So I think there's a lot of work that can be done there to sort of highlight it. And, I've always felt that, I've talked about SDOH, but, talking about all these things that lead to member churn has a very serious impact from an actuarial soundness perspective. I mean, if United Healthcare, that has more actuaries than the population of small countries, can miss the MLR by 340 basis points, there's an issue, and so I'd love to understand, how do we make this more front and center for health plans, that you have to make this, you have to start leaning into this. And if you've tried everything else and it's sort of working, not working, because, you hit your medical and pharmacy claims trend one year. Well, trends are, just by definition of the word trend, has to continue, right? It's not a one-off. And so the one-off here, in my mind, is trying to actually shift the discussion towards something that's going to have a material impact. It's like a seismic shift, of something you've just not done before, and it's going to have a material impact on member retention. So how do you? So, and I'm just kind of curious, how do you have that discussion with health plans? As opposed, not just when you're invited in, but if you say, okay, we've got a problem. It can be a medical problem. It can be a membership problem. It can be a G&A problem.
Right.
How does Accenture then bring that up as a discussion point for them to sort of take seriously, to consider?
So historically, there was always a burning platform of some kind, right? Whether it was technology that was going to be outdated, or, a financial risk that needs to be mitigated very quickly. It's an interesting time right now. And I think we're at a little bit of a turning point. And the reason for that is AI. I've been doing a lot of training on AI lately. And AI is it's going to uncover so much information, and that's going to create the urgency. So we're starting to see this with clients that are kind of making decisions essentially about reinventing how they even operate as organizations, because the use of AI is going to be kind of folded into everything that they do. And that has implications about how they operate, how their processes work, how much automation is in place, how much security is required to enable that, to make sure that it's safe and responsible AI, which essentially means new roles for people, right? An evolution of the nature of how we work in our workplace. We've been doing it within Accenture internally, right? People are getting trained on these things because it's kind of intrinsic to how we do work. It's how we develop proposals and how we develop material that we share with clients. It's just part of how we operate every day now, how we run meetings, like all of that stuff. So the point of that is to say, health insurance, like every other industry, whether it's today or in 12 months or in 2 years, but soon, everyone's going to get to this point where they're like, we need to reevaluate how we function, what our priorities are, and how we stay in business, how we keep operating in a way that works for everybody. And AI is the kind of catalyst behind all of that. We call it reinvention because that's the kind of the scale at which this is going to require change in strategy, in operations, and all those things. And I think clients are going to need a partner to help them figure that out because it's pretty massive.
So, one last question. How do you think guys like you, who are involved in, I think it's a fascinating area, And folks like me who are actuaries who are, who've made a living through data analytics and capturing the risk associated with that data and then basically putting a price tag on it. How this is a new frontier, well, it's not necessarily a new frontier, but it's a frontier that's catching momentum with the advent of AI. How do you think actuaries can really integrate with teams like yours to really catapult this into the same realm as medical and pharmacy claims analytics? That's become ubiquitous, right? And so, how do we turn this into analytics that is part and parcel of what a health plan should be doing
Yeah.
annually? Not monetizing this down on pricing is they do that all year long, right? And how do we turn that as actuaries and as organizational experts? How do you marry those two together to make that part and parcel of everyday conversation for a health plan?
Well, you said annually, but my head went to actually more, maybe even more often, maybe quarterly.
No, yeah.
So I think the connection here is I mentioned all of that data that's available out there, right? That requires aggregation and analysis to then pull out insights. I think the way in which actuaries and teams like mine can partner together is in, for example, the development of a value case or a business case that is going to point to specific areas, right? That we can take to executives that gives them hard numbers that says, here's why you need to do X. Here's why you need to invest in experience, right? But the short, medium, and long-term gains and advantages that gives you, right? Data and numbers, obviously, that's very important. I think we also have to kind of give the out of industry lens on that too. Like I mentioned earlier, you point to those companies that are known as being innovators. They're highly successful. They're doing that because they put the consumer first. It's not a binary. It's not be profitable or create a good experience, right? Both of those things exist together. And so the way in which we make that available to executives is through data and through numbers. And I think there's a way to put together a value case or a business case that says, here's why this is important, and here's all of the data that's available to help you make those choices and what you get at the end of it, both in terms of running your business, but also in terms of what that does for your members or your consumers, driving retention, growth, etc. You can, put together the business case that points very clearly to the outcomes that they can expect to drive.
This was a great Anoop. I really, really enjoyed it. I appreciate you coming. This is extremely helpful, informative. Thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Look forward to sharing more podcasts with you in the future. Thank you again, Anoop.
Thank you.